Welcome. We're going to do some introductions. Thank you for joining us here at this location. For those of you who haven't been to one of the HMIS trainings before, we locate these around the county. We hold dual audience, so in person and online. We have 35-ish people joining us online right now. We had 30 registered for in person, but that happens, you know. Some folks can't make it or traffic ends up bad. So we may have folks joining us later. So we're going to go around the room. We know that the online audience can't always hear everybody in the back of the room. So for introductions, we won't worry about that. But when it comes to the question and answers, we'll try to make sure to be repeating for the online audience. So my name is Stacey Holmes. I lead the King County HMIS System Administration team here. And I work for BitFocus, the vendor of the software that we use for HMIS.
Hi, I'm Danielle. I work for BitFocus.
Also on the King County System.
Also in the, yes.
I'm Eileen Denham. I work for the City of Seattle Human Services Department.
Great, welcome. And I know Kate Feltz from the county is going to be here today. She just ran out, and we'll be right back. And we have the full range of other HMIS participating agencies joining us online. So we, every time we're in a different setting, we have different audio and technology. So hopefully everything's going to work. We're hearing that our volume may be a little low, so I might be screaming at you guys a bit, mostly so that our folks can hear us online. Unlike usually we do a lot of discussion throughout the presentation. The focus of this presentation was really to try to dig into the APR, which is a very popular report, one that is required by some agencies to submit. We're going to go through the whole presentation, and just to make sure that we can get through all the content, we're really digging into every data element. And then leave a chunk of time at the end for questions. So to whatever extent possible, if you could try to keep your questions and just keep track of them, because they may be very specific, we can then scroll back to whatever slides, whatever question you want to scroll back to. But we're going to try to go through the whole data element. The goal really being that instead of you having to dig through the HUD specifications for the report, which maybe you already have, it's a good time, is that we wanted to try to frame every data element so that you could think about it, about what question you may be asking, and highlight those things in the HUD specifications for the report that are of interest. This is our agenda for today. First, we want to start off talking about why we thought this was important. We heard that this was a training that was desired, and so that's why we put it on the training schedule for this year. And we think it can be a very helpful tool as a report. Go through all the core data elements, do a quick demo so that you can see, if you haven't already, where you can run it in the system, and then spend a chunk of time for some Q&A and discussion. So the why it matters, and this is where I'll start, but then hand it over to our co-presenter, Eileen. So obviously we're talking about the HUD COC Annual Performance Report. That's its official name. That's what you will see it written, but we all just talk about it as the APR. It is updated regularly to align with the HUD data standards. So that means that every time HUD decides that HMIS systems need to collect a new data element, but then they also give the specifications for vendors to update this report. And if they don't, I mean, sometimes there's a lag period. And so then usually an update will come the year after, and they'll have us continually to tweak and update and refine the report to match the data standards. Obviously, it's a comprehensive view of client data. We have currently the Seattle King County Program Outcomes Report in the system, and it's a custom report that local funders worked together to develop. Before the outcomes report, this was it. This was the go-to report, and it continues to be the go-to report for a lot of reasons. And that I would segue to you, Eileen. What might those reasons be?
Oh, I am very glad to be here. I didn't mention what I did when I introduced myself with the City of Seattle. I helped to coordinate the annual application to HUD for COC program funding. The City of Seattle also acts as the recipient for about 40 individual projects that receive money through the COC program. King County is also a recipient of funds and distributes the money to subrecipients. We also have some agencies that are direct recipients, have a direct relationship with HUD and work directly with HUD on all of their contractual kind of obligations. One of those obligations is to submit this annual progress report. It is required. It's going to be part of any agreement with HUD. If you are a subrecipient of the City of Seattle or King County, it will also be a requirement in that subrecipient agreement. HUD has specific deadlines attached to the annual progress report. It needs to be submitted within 90 days of your grant ending date. And the annual progress report is really only one part of that whole kind of closeout process with HUD, but it's a very important part of that process. I, as I said, review about 40 of these every year. This is the latest iteration of the annual progress report. We used to have to hand enter all of this data into eSNAP's HUD, which is the electronic HUD application portal. Now it's all kind of uploaded in a CSV file and it just lands in this platform called Sage. Those of you who are a direct grantee are familiar with Sage. Otherwise, Kate and I kind of act as the intermediary for assuring that your report is uploaded in the proper platform and that you are credited with submitting your reports on time. Some of the direct grantees had a little bit of difficulty in remembering that this report was due. They don't have as many reports as, say, I do or Kate does every year. So that was problematic. I want to let you know, if you are a direct grantee, that HUD is rectifying that. You will now get a very scary alert from LOCKS, the line of credit control system, telling you that your grant is ending and you better get your APR and all of your documentation in or you'll risk losing money. So I just want you to know, if you're a direct grantee, you're going to be getting these notices. So it's just going to highlight even more how important this report is just for compliance purposes. But I also want to talk about why it's important to you as a management tool. Go down to the next slide. Oh, there we go. Oh, yes. Yes, I did all of that. It is a very important management tool. HUD has spent years developing it. As we've gone through many, many iterations of the annual progress report, I think we finally hit on something that is, from my perspective, easy to use. It's very dependent on agencies inputting the data at the agency level. The data that goes in is live. I can go in at any time and pull this report. It's only going to look as good as the data that you entered. The report looks at any number of things. I want to talk about how I look at an annual progress report. When I pull it, I look to make sure that the data is complete, that the validation tables are making sense, that things across the report are, the one thing in one part of the report is matching the other part of the report. I also want to make sure that your data is complete and of good quality. If it's not, number one, I'm not able to upload it in Sage. HUD won't accept it if there's some internal validation errors. So many of you who have worked with me know that probably within 15 to 20 days of your grant ending, I will be calling you about what I see when I look at the APR. I shouldn't really have to do that. What I would hope and what I always encourage agencies to do is to actually use the annual progress report to review it at least quarterly during the year. You want to review it to make sure that, again, the data is being entered in a timely basis, that the data is accurate, and that the data is complete. When I look at the APR, one of the things that I want to know is is the story. So the APR kind of tells a story about your project. We submitted the application to HUD that said you're a transitional housing program serving families, families with children. We have expectations of a transitional housing program, that they eventually will be moving out into permanent housing, moving out as quickly as possible. If you say that your target population is families, do I see actually families enrolled in the program? What does the family composition look like? If I'm looking at a permanent supportive housing project serving chronically homeless persons, am I going to see actually single adult chronically homeless? Am I going to see single adults entered in there, or will I see some kind of unaccompanied youth that don't really belong to your project? Why are they there? Have you been looking to make sure that those issues are addressed before I pull the report? Are all the data points showing that the individual has a disability as they're required to have if they're chronically homeless? Where were they coming from before they entered the program? If a project is to serve the chronically homeless, the priority is they're coming from streets and shelter. What does it mean in the APR if all of a sudden I see people coming from unsubsidized housing, and yet your target population is chronically homeless? There's something wrong there. Another thing I look at is if it's a permanent housing project, what's your turnover? Why would I see if you have a capacity at any point in time of 50 people, but I see that 20 people are exiting? Why is that happening? Could be that it's a data entry error. It could be that actually you are having problems retaining residents in your housing project. In other words, when you should be pulling this report, trying to look again at what is the story that this report is telling, and is it telling an accurate picture? Is it portraying an accurate picture of your project? I will say that in the beginning, when I was reviewing the APR, there was a lot of trouble with having kind of extra members of families, members that weren't associated with the household, projects that, you know, the individuals coming into the program should have had a disability. In fact, it was showing that 0 residents had a disability. I've noticed that as BitFocus and Clarity have been working with you so much, and as we've been working with you, the quality of the data is improving. So we're not seeing so much of this kind of random things that don't make sense. What we are seeing are this general picture that may not really accurately represent your program. We're also seeing a picture where the performance may not really be up to snuff. So the other way that we use the annual progress report is when we are evaluating COC funded program projects on an annual basis when we go through the annual application process, and we use the APR to evaluate your performance. So we'll be looking at the APR for things like movement to permanent housing, longevity in permanent supportive housing. Are you serving chronically homeless, the target population that we funded you to serve? Are residents being connected to income sources? What is the average length of stay? How quickly are you moving them to permanent housing? All of those things we will find in the APR, which is why it is so important that program managers look at this report regularly. And whether or not you are a COC program funded project, the data is so robust in here that it will tell you a lot about what you need to know about your program. Again, how long people are staying, how quickly they're moving into permanent housing, whether you're getting them connected to income sources, kind of that kind of general management perspective, again, given all of the focus on performance. Right?
Great. Thank you.
Okay,
Yeah,
great. So
awesome.
we'll have an opportunity to ask questions of you as well. So those were all the questions that a funder may have, right? And so then we've broken up the elements to look at some of those questions and just sort of thinking about every single element and what the questions are. How are we doing on sound for folks? Okay. I know it can be tricky. So now we're going to go through the data elements. How many people in this room have run an APR report? Great. Okay. And I assume we have some folks who would have raised their hand who are online as well. So again, so here's where it's located. And these slides will get sent out to everybody so they can act as a resource for you as well. So it's in the HUD reports area. It's big. If you print it out, it could be 45 pages if it's a PDF. Depends on how you print it out. We would always recommend that you run it in web form, and when Danielle demos that, she can show you, because you can then drill down and see all the clients behind each number. It gives a specific information about chronic homelessness and fleeing domestic violence, specific data about the stayers and leavers. So if you've ever looked at HUD reports before and sort of think about how HUD thinks about, you know, the stayers, the people who are continuing in your project, the leavers, the people who have exited your project. Those are HUD terms that they use on the report. So it's good to be familiar with them. And there's a lot of information, especially on the first elements that we're going to look at, that are also similar to a new report that HUD put out last year called the HMIS Data Quality Report. Those tables almost match. And the great thing about that HUD Data Quality Report is that we have a very detailed reference tool on the King County HMIS website. So if you're really wanting to dig into data quality, that part of the APR, you can run the data quality report and understand it in minutia by looking at that reference tool that we have on the website. And when this gets sent out as PDF, that link is a live link, so you should be able to just click on that. I keep wanting to go to the laptop, sorry. So we start at the beginning, the header. I know that you won't all be able to see everything that's on the screen. Again, you'll get these slides. This is important to know that there are certain elements in the header, because when you run a report and you see these numbers don't make sense to me, then you should immediately go back to the header and see what your parameters were. Did you include the right date range? And later you'll see that you can see which projects were part of the report. So it shows you information about the date range, the continuum of care filter, client location filter. For us here in King County, because we're continuum wide HMIS, you're going to just be, it's going to be one continuum of care filter, same with the client. But this report could get run in a variety of different ways. That's why HUD requires us to include some things on there that may not apply to us here in King County. So then it starts at question 4, which seems weird. What happened to 1 through 3? 1 through 3 is not output on the APR report. It is part of the Sage upload, and HUD grabs that information from HMIS, but doesn't ask us to include it on the APR when they ask us vendors to build it out. So your first question that you're starting to look at starts with 4. The project identifiers, again, more information. What is included here is your agency, the HMIS ID, it identifies if the codes for if you're a night-by-night shelter, or if you're an entry-exit shelter, if emergency shelter is the project you're running it on, if you're a services-only program, residential affiliation. So again, this is information that HUD is very interested in, and you may be interested in if you want to make sure that it's reflecting what you think it should be reflecting. Question 5 is where you start to get into the meat of the report. This is the report validation table. This table looks exactly the same on that data quality report that I was mentioning. This is the universe of clients that then all the other tables are going to be calculating against. That's why it's called the validation table. This is the first stop of looking at how many total clients did we serve and in which categories. So it gives us how many total persons and then breaks it up. How many of those were kids? How many of those were adults? How many of those were youth? You know, with the HUD definition of under 25 years old, how many of those youth were heads of households? How many of them were chronically homeless? Number of veterans. And it's important that you think that these numbers look correct, because these are the denominators for all the percentages that you see throughout the rest of the report. When we look at the other tables and HUD has done the calculation that says, this is how many total chronic homeless, so this is the percent of that many chronic homeless people who XYZ, that's the denominator of that calculation. So this is the first stop. And it's important that you understand that HUD, how they define leavers, stayers, youth, and again, youth is this, sometimes those youth are minors, sometimes those youth are adults, because we're looking at that young adult youth category. And then remembering that there's a very, very specific definition for what it means to be chronically homeless, according to HUD. And so that definition gets used throughout all the reports. So we start with the data validation table, and then we go into some different data quality elements. So again, those first elements of the APR report are data quality elements. This first one is around personally identified information. That's PII. How much PII data are missing? So that's what we're asking. We're looking at this question. We're looking, HUD is showing how many it thinks, or this report is calculating the don't know refused, the data not collected, that's missing data, that counts as missing. Whether it's null or blank is also obviously missing. And then there's these data issues. It just says data issues in the report. And every element that has particular rules around it that has a data issue would get counted there. So for example, and there's a long list of these. Again, the reference tool for the data quality report, we have those listed, but and the specs talk about it as well. But for example, the name quality fields that we all fill out, if it says partial name, then that name has an issue, so it might get counted there. If the Social Security number does not follow the rules of the Social Security Administration, if it's not 9 digits, if it has all zeros or some zeros, or if it has certain combinations of numbers that the Social Security Administration says would never show up in a Social Security number, then that is going to be counted as having a data issue. It's not missing, it's not don't know refused, but it's not correct. So it gets counted as having an issue. For date of birth, if it's a partial date of birth, that's listed under the data quality field. If it's a birthday before 1915, if it's a birthday that somehow is after the record was created, so I type in today, but the person looks like they were born tomorrow, that's going to get recorded as a data issue. So the report is built to collect all of these according to HUD's rules about what designates a data issue. Same thing for universal data elements, although I'll show you, if I go back here, there's much more detailed information about the missing information for demographic data and personally identified information. For these other elements, they're counting just error counts. It doesn't go quite as detailed of identifying the type of error. So what errors are showing for our other client profile data. So we're still just in the client profile. Don't know refused or missing. If there's overlapping dates in projects. So I have one client that is enrolled in my project and those enrollments overlap instead of our one after the other. If there's a conflict, if there's some head of household data conflicts, we can't, the system can't quite tell who the head of household is. If there's a conflict for disabling condition, so for example, where I say no, there's no disabling condition, but then I say yes, there's a physical disability and it's long-term, or so if there's a conflict in the system, then it's going to capture it here and tell me that there's an error count for that profile data. What are the errors showing for income and housing data? So this table shows destination and income and sources. Is there don't know, refuse, missing cases that we're dealing with for exit destination? For my income and sources, it's 3 data collection stages. So there's 3 times that I might be entering information about a client around their income and the types of income sources. That would be at project entry. That would be at their annual assessment if they've stayed in my project for 365 days. And or at exit, depending on where they are in participation in my project. This data quality table is telling me that there's a mismatch, there's an error count. So I said they didn't have income, but then I listed income sources, or vice versa, or that there's somehow something that just is not possible. And so those inconsistencies get counted in the error count. I know I'm going through some of these quickly. I think some of them we'll spend more time on, so I want to make sure that we have time for those. More data quality. Another data quality table. Is there anything missing that may be needed to identify a client as chronically homeless? So, and again, on these slides, we tried to capture those things that might be hard to see by just looking at the table, so that you know, if you're looking at the numbers, you have to always think what universe is defined in this data element. Some of our data elements only count certain things for adults only, for adults in head of households, for all of our group of clients. And so that's why this data quality table for what's missing for our chronically homeless clients identifies the count of active adults or head of household who were entered the project anytime after that date, because that's when some of the data standards changed for 3.917, I think it is, the living situation element. It gives you a count of enrollments that are missing certain fields for those living situation questions. And then a percent of those enrollments that cannot be used to calculate. So you have your enrollments, and this table is telling you, I can't give you a yes or a no. We don't have enough information to tell you whether this client is chronically homeless. So if, again, this is a good one to look at to make sure for data quality purposes, if you expect that all of your clients that you're serving are chronically homeless, then you should be seeing zeros in terms of error and unable to calculate. So it's just giving you a guidepost. You maybe have more chronically homeless clients, but we're not able to calculate that. So then we move from data quality in terms of missing data and look at the timeliness, because that's something that Eileen mentioned funders are interested in, HUD is interested in. How long are we taking to enter our enrollments and exits into HMIS? This gives you a count between the days between the project start or exit date and then the timestamp of that record in the database, and calculates number. It tells you how many records are in each of those categories a start and project entry record and a project exit, and then how many days it took between those two dates. I'll just stop there. That's all it is. This is looking at question 6F, inactive records. How many clients, and this is specifically around projects that are street outreach or emergency shelter night by night for this particular data element. How many clients in our street outreach or night by night shelter are being counted as inactive and need an update or an exit? So this is looking at whether or not there's a contact. So for street outreach projects, a contact service or a bed night within the last 90 days since entry. And then there's another count for night by night shelters of no bed night for more than 90 days. So for HUD's data quality purposes, this APR is interested in this 90-day period. I would remind you to go back and look at the standard operating procedures for King County, because the standard operating procedures that we all agree to are much less than 90 days of when we are expected to exit night by night shelters for data quality, data accuracy. But this particular data element is really focused on, are these languishing, right? If we don't have contact with a street outreach client in this period of time, if we don't have bed nights for a night by night shelter within the 90-day period, this is giving you a count for that. Person served. So this should, again, be able to be validated against that first table that we looked at, the report validation table. If you are going back and looking, if you always have that table, you should be always able to see these totals reflected there. How many adults and children did we serve overall? And then how many did we serve on these particular point in time count that HUD has had us program into this report? So it's the count of individuals. And then it also breaks up those individuals by household types. Household types meaning, are these households with children or households without children, or with only children? So for youth head of households, for example. Or do we not have enough information to even know what their household type is? The PIT date for the purposes of this report, it tells you on the table here, the point in time count of persons on the last Wednesday. So it's programmed in for that report period. What were the last Wednesdays in the January, April, July, and October? Those are the dates that HUD uses for those point in time counts. And the tables, well, they don't always give you all the information. They do tell you which types of projects are being counted in this table. So for example, Q7A, the number of persons served, shows all types of projects. So if you're a permanent supportive housing project or an emergency shelter project, you're going to get counted in that table. Q7B, the point in time count table, it only counts those project types that are listed. So it is not including emergency shelter or other. It's just list those ones, TH, transitional housing, permanent supportive housing, and the other ones that are listed there. Keep track of your questions. I know there will be some. 8A and B, households served. How many households did we serve overall and on the HUD PIT tape? So very similar to the one we were just on. Instead of just looking at individuals, we're looking at households now. We're counting households. Questions 9A and 9B, contacted and engaged. So contacted and engaged has very specific definitions when we're talking about HMIS. We're talking about contacted. We're talking about the contact service that gets entered after an enrollment. And we're talking about engaged. We're talking about the date of engagement. Those data elements apply to certain project types, night by night shelters and street outreach. A bed night gets counted as a contact for the purposes of a night-by-night shelter. And then a contact service, literally called that, is the contact that gets entered for a street outreach project. So these tables only apply to adults and head of households. So again, I distinguish the head of households gets distinguished often because you can have a 16-year-old head of household, obviously enrolled in a project. They're going to get counted here, even though they're not an adult. Contacted means the contact service, like I just said, from the whole project stay. First contact is the first contact within the report range. Persons engaged shows contacts, but only for the people who have the engagement date. So this table 9B, think of it as a subset of all the people who potentially were contacted. The people up here in 9A could have a contact and a bed night without having an engagement date in their record. But 9B is only going to look at those people who have an engagement date in their record. And then there's this engagement rate that's calculated. And HUD calculates this engagement rate by dividing the total number of contacts by the total number of engaged to get this rate. So these two tables have a relationship in that way. This is a meaty one. Then we go into some demographics, 10A, 10B, and 10C, gender, total. This shows totals. Again, if you can't see it because the table's hard to read, totals, and then by household. How many of those households without children, children and adults, or unknown household type. Oh, and there's with only children here as well. Broken up by the gender categories. And then there's separate tables for adults, children, and then missing. Similar to age, what's the age breakdown of our client population? Like Eileen sort of mentioned, you know, if she's not expecting that your project is serving very young children, this might be one where she's looking to see, oh, what is the age breakdown of this project? And for me, as somebody who's looking at data quality, I'm really curious. This table example shows that there is a household with only children where there's under 5-year-olds. So I'm really interested in a household with only children where there's the under 5-year-olds. So I just want to make sure that that's accurate, especially when there's zeros everywhere else. So it's not a 17-year-old with a 5-year-old child. So that looks like a data quality issue to me. And again, it tells you the unknown household type. So that's a data quality issue also on these. So we don't have enough information for whatever reason to categorize this household type. So that's always a flag. So similar to gender and age, there's a breakdown of our client population by race. It shows all the race categories, shows the doesn't know and refused and the data not collected, and it breaks it down by household type. Same thing with ethnicity, breaks it down by those categories, and the missing by household type. These questions, 13A, B, C, 1, helps us answer the question, what are the physical and mental health conditions? What physical and mental health conditions did our clients have at project entry, project exit, or based on the most recent information available if the client is still active? So we know that if we have stayers, folks that are active in our project for 365 days, then we are required to have an annual assessment for them to update, an annual update within 30 days of their project entry anniversary date. Those are the HMIS standards. So the APR in a variety of places is looking at always looking at that for a data collection stage if it is and should be applicable. So meaning if I have somebody who's been with me 90 days, the APR is not going to expect an annual assessment. But if I have somebody who's been with me 400 days, then it's not going to go back and look at the project entry in some cases. It's going to expect to go back and look at my annual assessment because I should have done one at 365 days, that 30-day period. This table, the physical and mental health conditions, it does the same breakdown of household type by condition category. It shows how many make up each total. A reminder that HMIS data in Washington is limited to specific project types. So while this report gets used across the country, it looks a little different in the HMIS category for our state. And the conditions, like I said, the conditions for stayers is pulled from the most recent screen. So that's what I meant. Like if my stayer is here and they would expect to see an annual assessment, it's going to go there. Same thing here. Conditions, how many conditions did each of our clients have at each of these phases? So the question before was, what were those conditions? This question is, how many conditions did our clients have? And it says, you know, 1 condition, 2, 2 plus, or DV history and fleeing. Count of adults in head of household indicating that they were a survivor of domestic violence. So that's the history for the table 14A. 14B, of those that gave a history, how many indicated that they're actively fleeing? Living situation, long table here. What situations were our clients living in immediately prior to entering our project? Remember, this is an important question that for determining chronic homelessness. Gives you a count, splits it up by household type, and breaks it up by the homeless situation, institutional settings, housed, and other, and then has the missing categories. There's a lot of questions about income. So the next few are all about income. How much monthly income were our adult clients receiving at project entry, exit, or at their annual update? These are accounts of adults. And I wanted to point out for this one that the sum of the column equals the total. These totals match what you should see in your report validation table. So it's always good. If you're confused, again, like who are we counting here? That report validation table can be very grounding. Question 17, cash income sources. So this is looking at the types of places that our clients are receiving their income from. So the types of income our adult clients were receiving. And then the bottom is looking at the counts of adult stayers and adult leavers that have more than one income. So we're going to start comparing. The APR report starts to look at the change. What was the income change from start to the annual update, to the annual assessment? What was the change from start to exit? So it's giving me that this is how many clients that I can do that comparison with. How many adult clients have earned income versus other types of income? So there's, again, those at the bottom of these income charts are the clients that you can do that comparison with. How many adult clients have had a change in income amount or their type of income over time? So this is those parts of the APR report that looking at the change in income. Calculates the average change across the group of clients that fit that category. So if you have these clients that have the ability to have had a change because you have data here and you have data here, the APR report starts doing a calculation. Same thing then when we talked about cash benefits, then the APR starts going through non-cash benefits. Count of adults for each type of benefit and the benefit sources. So information in this slide about the leavers as well. Those were non-cash benefits. Then it goes into health insurance. The bottom rows, again, show counts of clients who have only one source versus more than one source. So again, the APR is always interested into multiples of things for each client and changes over time. How long did our clients participate in our program? So this is what Eileen was referencing also in terms of exits and length of time staying in a project. So we've moved from income to looking at by day, how many of our clients have been here each day. Of those that already left, how long were they here? And of those that are still here, how long have they been here? So it breaks out the total by leavers and stayers and then gives you average and median length of stay in days down below. This table here in terms of time looks specifically at rapid rehousing. So it's looking at when did they enter, when did I, my start date for my enrollment and the move-in date. And so, and by household type. Exit destination, no more than 90 days, and then there's a more than 90 days table. What were the exit destinations for our clients who were enrolled in our program for more than 90 days, sorry, more than 90 days. Gives a very detailed breakdown of these destinations, percent of clients exiting to a positive destination. So HUD has a very specific definition of positive destination. I put that definition here in this slide and it gives you the percent. How many of our clients are exiting to what HUD considers a positive destination? And then 90 days or less. Same elements, but within 90 days or less period of time. Okay, those are the elements. The next few slides just point out a few things around specific populations, and then Danielle can jump and do a demo. But the tables go on forever with the APR. We didn't think we should repeat them all per population here, but know that there's a set of questions for veterans that are look at veteran individuals who have yes as their status on their profile, and counts veteran households. You can ask all those same questions around demographics and income and benefits on your veteran population by looking at the APR. Same thing with chronic homelessness. It also counts chronic homeless households, determined on whether any of the adults or head of household are chronically homeless at project start, within the project that's getting counted in that, within the project stay that's getting counted in that report. So you can look at all those same tables, or almost all the same tables, with your chronic homeless population. And youth, same thing. I wanted to pull out to show you that you can look at all these same tables with youth. This particular table is a little different because it's focused on parenting youth. So this 27B table, how many young parents as head of household did we serve, and how many of our clients are the children of those young parents? So this table is really focused on a very specific subset of the youth. And it has this interesting thing where the parenting youth, those households, if they have another adult in there, get counted as well. It's sort of specific to how the APR is programmed. If you're curious about which projects got included, if you want to confirm which projects got included when you ran this report, the list of projects will be listed at the footer. And that's the report. I mean, it's much longer than that, but it sounds so easy, right? So let's have Danielle show you how to run it and also show what a drill down looks like. And then we can go back and talk about anything that we want to talk about. So
Yeah, great. When you log into your screen, it pops up like this. The reports are in this little buttony thing here. Reports, this is a HUD report. You're looking at this one that's the most up-to-date one. It gives you the option of selecting COCs. The default is fine. It should default to Seattle King County. You have the option of choosing by program type, program status. So all programs means all programs. Active programs are the programs that were active during your reporting period, and inactive programs were the programs that were inactive during your reporting period. You can select a specific program. You can look at several programs at once. This apply client location filter, you can leave as no. This legacy feature, go ahead and do not based on funding source. Choose your dates. And then I recommend running it as a web page because you can look at drill downs, meaning giving it a moment to run. But when you run it as a web page, it gives you the option of actually looking and seeing what the report sees, right? So if the report says there's an error, you can look and see which client specifically it's looking at. So if there are errors that you see that shouldn't be there or things that you know aren't right, you can click and kind of do some investigation. So one thing I wanted to flag, for example, a good example is this, a number of child and unknown age heads of household, right? So anywhere you see a number, you can click on that number and it gives you what the report is seeing, right? So it's seeing this child right here who's 17 and a head of household, right? So if you're a youth program, but if you're not serving youth specifically, that would be a flag that maybe they're not connected to the rest of the household. They have an individual enrollment instead of a group enrollment. And then this one, Panda Zoo, doesn't actually have a date of birth or doesn't have that information in there. Another thing I wanted to flag with the drill downs, so these numbers will give you drill downs, but these percentages do not because they're a mathematic calculation. So these percentages are based on these numbers. So you can go in the number itself and look.
right, and you can see in that drill down, you can kind of read across and get a lot of information for that particular client. Can you do a drill down further down so we can see how it might, so maybe for conditions and see what we are getting?
Sure.
So number of conditions for stayers. So again, it tells us, it doesn't tell us the conditions necessarily, but it tells us, well, it does actually, I was wrong. It does, you can get a lot of information for details for every single table of, for that specific element.
Anything else?
Okay. When you run the report, if you go up to the top, Danielle, one thing to note is that there's a link here at the top that would take you to the help center because it has step-by-step instructions. If you're responsible for uploading into the SAGE repository where is where all the APRs have to be uploaded to submit to HUD. There's instructions linked at the top of the web-based report that'll take you to the help center where you can see step-by-step instructions for the SAGE repository.
Great. While we have this open, does anyone have any questions so far?
Yes,
Kate?
This isn't a question, but I would just say whenever I look at this, I would suggest to anyone who is looking at it for their own program management purposes, I always look at the ones where the data was not collected. And particularly if you're a program that's permanent housing or transitional housing, maybe you didn't collect that data at entry, but that doesn't mean you can't collect it and put that information in now. So I think that's just a really good way to sort of keep an eye to see that there's that complete story.
right, yeah, it was just, so what Kate was saying was reminding everybody that one way that she would advise is really looking at the data not collected part of every element, because especially if you're a permanent housing or transitional housing project, you likely have your clients now, you have a relationship with them, you can collect that data now and update the record. So we have a question that if a client initially reports no disabling condition, but later says they do, should staff update the enrollment to reflect the disabling condition? Yes, I mean, if a client has a disabling condition, then you should definitely update the record to reflect that. If it is appropriate, if you're doing it during the annual update, then that's the place to do it. You can also do it in a status update in the system. It's important, definitely, since we know that that's such a big part of how HUD or how anybody calculates chronic homelessness, you want to make sure that disabling condition data is as thorough and accurate as possible. Was there another piece of that?
I meant while doing initial intake, there's a question about having a disabling condition, but the later questions about specific conditions.
Oh, right. Yes, you don't want a conflict between those. So if they're reporting a specific condition, then that would be an indicator that they have a disabling condition. So you would want to make sure that there's consistency. Otherwise, you will end up with this sort of error count conflict. We should probably go back to slides. Okay, so I talked at you a lot just to get through these, just to get the high level tour of everything that's in the APR report. Question?
I just want to touch back on that, and that was going from no disabling condition to a disabling condition. What happens when you have clients that think that they had a disabling condition, but now report at exit they don't have a disabling condition? Does that now, is that going to throw this report off?
Let's look at the disabling condition table, since we're talking specifically about the report. Because yes, it potentially could. Oh wait, did I go past it? Condition types. It is pulled from the most recent screen. So that for stayers, which I don't know that it pulls from the exit screen, actually. I think it pulls from entry or status update. Every table is a little different. There are some elements that only get collected upon entry, but usually every report is looking at the most recent screen that's been updated, unless it's programmed not to, right? Unless it says only look at the exits or only look at the entry. Yeah. And so it's always good to just like take a step back sometimes and say, okay, let's think about where this data is getting collected from. Questions? Yes. So 22, I love that you kept track of the question. So length of participation. So how are the stayers calculated? So those are going to be active within, so this report looks at your report range that you put in and the latest project stay for any client that you're serving. So if you've served a client and they stayed with you for a month, that was also within this report range, and then stayed with you again for 3 months, 2 different enrollments. This report's only going to look at the latest project stay. And if they're still with you, they don't have an exit date, then they're a stayer. And the stayer, it's going to calculate from their project start date.
Stacy, a question. When updating the chronic conditions on the status assessment, will that data report on the APR, or should it be captured in the enrollment prior to the annual assessment?
If you're talking about a stayer who should have an annual assessment, and that's where you're putting in new updating information that will update their disabling condition, you should put it in their annual assessment. That is the expectation that that's where a report would be programmed to look, because HUD is expecting that there's an annual assessment.
Say the second part to that is, if it's not one that has an annual assessment, then you should do a status update.
Yes, yes. So Kate's clarification is a good one. If it's not one that would have a annual assessment, then you should do a status update.
So I have a question. So did you say that the annual assessment is most important for the income questions, or is that annual assessment affect other elements within the APR?
I believe it can affect other elements.
So is there a best practice for users for remembering to do that annual assessment, or the timing of the annual assessment? Because I see that a lot, where, they would have missed like 10 clients. They didn't do the annual assessment, and where I really see it is on the income questions. And I'm curious to know if there's other questions that are impacted if they miss that annual assessment. So if you've got a large number of clients in your program, I just wondered if there was a best practice maybe that we could, for making sure that that annual assessment is actually done within the.
Right. Well, so the question is, if you have a lot of clients for whom you might need to do an annual assessment, what's the best practice to kind of help you remember? So we have notifications in Clarity in the system that should be turned on, that will sort of flag when you're on a client's profile, letting you know an annual assessment is due. And it's based on the start date for that enrollment. So the HMIS, even though your individual agency may not get HUD funded, HMIS standards require that every client that has a project enrollment will get an annual assessment at the anniversary of their project start date, within a 30-day before or 30-day after period. If you do a status update in Clarity at that time, it does not count. It has to be an annual assessment, because the computer counts it as an annual assessment, and then all reports count it as such.
One thing I wanted to flag with the assessment reminders was that is something we've turned on. It defaults to 2 weeks, but for the enrollments that were created before we turned that on, it's something that users will need to manually turn on. It didn't retroactively turn it on.
Yeah, and it's easy. You can turn it on.
So how would you go about doing that?
Do you want to
Yeah.
show? So
Yeah.
while I talk, Danielle will go over to the system.
For the annual assessment. So when you have a client, they're linked to specific enrollments, and then this status, this assessment due notification for this client is currently off. So you can edit it and save changes. The person who receives this reminder is the assigned staff person here. So the system will automatically send a reminder 2 weeks before the due date to the assigned staff person.
I think I asked you this before, but I have so many people I think that we need to do annual assessments for. So I need to go back and see who needs them. So
Yeah.
I'm trying to find a way to run a report.
Well, one way to do it is a data quality report. The validations table on here and the data quality report have a line of showing how many people should have an annual assessment, or how many people over 365 days?
Yeah.
And that will be your clue, right? Also, the program roster report, if you've ever run the program roster report, it has number of assessments in the column, and it's talking about the status and annual assessments. And most people would be doing annual assessments. So if you have clients that are not exited, and you can see in that program roster how long they've been there, because it says length of stay by days. Anybody who's 365 days or over, you should see one at least in your assessments column. It's a really quick way to eyeball who needs it.
Okay. And you said in the data quality report, it'll show how many people are over a year.
Yeah, well, also the first table in the APR here, that validations table, the Q4 says how many stayers, 365 days. If you drill down on that, that's at least the short list, right?
Looking at everyone's enrollment. Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Does the alert go to our inbox in Clarity? Email.
No, you probably have it's probably in your inbox.
Okay.
Very few auto notices go outside to the external email.
Okay.
Good questions, everybody. Other questions? Feeling good about the APR report? Yes.
Another data quality question. For date of birth and social security and name, particularly for one of our sites, we have a lot of clients that are fleeing domestic violence, mothers and children. And so for that question, it's a very high percentage. And so I'm wondering if whoever is looking at that takes DV's fleeing status into account with those errors. Because if they're fleeing, we have to de-identify them,
Right.
which means
That means they're
quality
missing.
is not so great. So I'm hoping they have a little mercy for us.
Well, I think if you're talking about the contract monitors who may be looking at the APR, or folks in Kate or Eileen's positions, they are very aware of which programs would have expected the identified profiles. And we can't program that in, so it just shows up as missing, because it is missing.
Yeah. Okay.
So the question was around, do report reviewers and funders take into account the fact that we have legitimate missing data when it comes to fleeing domestic violence? Yes, that's the short answer.
I don't think I need to really say this, but I just wanted to point out that the point in time count on Wednesday is a great place to also go and look to make sure that you're operating at capacity. It may not be a data quality issue, but it certainly is going to be a performance issue. So I just wanted to point that out.
Great. Yeah. So Eileen was talking about looking at the point in time tables those last Wednesdays in order to do a check of capacity and utilization. Other questions? Are there other questions from online? So our goal, hopefully we met our goal, that we wanted to have you think about this report in terms of what you're counting for your own client population and what kinds of questions you can ask yourself. A reminder that some of the resources, the version that is in there now is effective through September. There's a couple tweaks that HUD has given us, the vendor, to make. And so there's another version under development that is expected to go live October 1st and to be available October 1st. HUD's always giving a few corrections or tweaks. If you are interested to see the background of this report in particular, these two resources, the programming specifications and the reporting glossary, gives a lot of detail. I mean, if you really are like, it's kind of fun, it's sleuthing. If you really want to figure out why is this person being counted this way, you can always come to us. We'll always help you figure it out. The BitFocus help desk, my team will always help you figure it out as well. But those, if you want to go to the source, are the good resources. I mentioned the Sage upload instructions on the Help Center. And then again, our help desk helps people answer questions about the APR all the time. We'll always help you figure out why somebody is or isn't being counted a certain way, and help you narrow in on what the problem is. Always happy to do that. And then we have some more trainings coming up. We have more office hours. We actually have office hours.
We do, the
coming up. I
29th.
missed it somehow.
Yeah.
Coming up this week on the 29th. And then the next set of dates for office hours and pulling together the HMIS leads, if you're in that role, are on here as well. Are you speaking or? Okay, come on up, Kate. I thought you were trying to leave.
No,
This is Kate Speltz.
I just wanted to say, one of the reasons we wanted to have this presentation today is this really is a good tool. I use it when I'm trying to check on various programs that aren't HUD COC funded. And it's a good way, if some of the questions that do levers and stairs, it's a good way to look and see, is there something different about the profiles of some of the levers and stairs that we could use to maybe help some of the levers who aren't leaving to a good destination? Or is there a big difference between the length of stay between levers who are successful and not successful? Just looking at some of that information. So it's just a really good tool. And for just keeping your data quality up, just using all those, check those data not collected and some of those missing and see if you can quickly update them. So I just think it's a really helpful tool, which is why we wanted to, whether you have to do it for
Right.
fund purposes.
Great. I mean, really, it's different than the outcomes report, but between those two, APR and the outcomes report, you really get a comprehensive view of not only your inputs, like how many and who are they, but your outputs, where are they going, what happened while they were here, their income change, where did they go to, and your outcomes. So the two reports together really give you a really comprehensive view.
And I meant to say for program managers who may be in HMIS rarely, or it's a report you can ask someone to run for you on a regular basis.
Yeah, for program managers. Yep, absolutely. Great. And hopefully these slides kind of act as a report guide, you know, you can have as reference. If you remember, God, I remember we talked about this. If you don't want to dig into the specs, hopefully it gives you a little breadcrumb trail for interpreting the APR along the way. So I hope this was good. Great. Any final
Awesome.
questions?
Nope. Thank you
No?
all for attending.
Thank you.
Have an
I'm so
awesome day.
glad It worked out.